Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, 25 years serial tech entrepreneur. My new book, Fail Hard, Win Big, came out on Amazon in July of this year. This is my story of having 30 ventures with 20 of them failing, but 10 being successes. Key thing for me has always been building custom software to have better internal operations, to create unique client experiences, and to raise enterprise value. Now I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We are a nearshore custom software development company. And today we are joined by Michael Lieberman out of New York. Mike is an engineer. He's been a DevOps guy, a cloud guy, a CTO, and co-founder. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Mike, if you would, give our listeners a few-minute journey of your career.
Sure. So I graduated college in the middle of the 2008, 2009 sort of financial crisis. So struggled to find something initially, but one of the things I ended up doing was I worked at sort of a little mom and pop managed services kind of company. And I think right there, I noticed I had a passion for automation. This is before DevOps was really coined as a term.
Okay.
And very quickly noticed, hey, I had this passion. I then went to a couple of other companies that were very focused on automation, things like, if you remember, like Nagios and triggering based off of Nagios alerts and those sorts of things. And also the cloud was just becoming a thing when I had sort of graduated. So I very quickly had sort of was looking at that, buying books, trying to learn as much as I could.
I always laugh when the cloud just came out. Everyone's asking what it was. And my answer was, all it means is it's somebody else's data center, not yours.
Yeah, exactly. It was just, hey, you don't have the server in your closet. We have the server in our closet.
Exactly. Just somebody else's closet.
Yeah. And so from there, because I had a lot of that early expertise, I got hired at a startup that, hey, Chef, Puppet, a lot of these other things were still relatively new. And they brought me in as the expert on a lot of those things. And then from there, I got into financial services. So I was doing a whole lot with AWS, things like Chef, Puppet, Terraform, those sorts of like infrastructure as code, config as code sorts of things. And then I ended up at Bridgewater Associates, which was a large hedge fund out in Connecticut. And they were super, super concerned with security. Like they wanted to adopt all of these new technologies and they needed expertise from folks like myself to come in and do that, but do that in a way where security is paramount, right? They were super worried about, foreign state actors trying to steal intellectual property from them. And that to them was like, absolutely not. So a lot of the great sort of tools and technologies that folks take for granted today, like Kubernetes, hey, they didn't have a great security story back then. And so I was doing a lot of both developing the software, but also sort of providing that leadership to other members of the team to help drive them to understand how can we do this cloud stuff in a secure, scalable way.
Okay.
And then I took that to sort of some of the banks like MUFG, and then eventually to Citi, where it was, again, doing that same sort of thing of trying to do sort of cloud transformations, but also third-party risk management. That was a big, big thing over there, which is, hey, we want to use all of these great open source tools and technologies, the sorts of things like policy as code, like OPA and whatever else that's out there. But how do we do this in a safe and secure way? Because for them, having a vulnerable piece of software is potentially, your online banking gets compromised and then you're leaking customer data, and that's real bad as a bank.
Yes.
And while at those places, we started to sort of, myself and then my co-founders as well, we were all seeing the same sorts of things again and again at these sorts of places, which is, they're struggling with, dependencies and third-party software. They're struggling with adopting these new technologies that will help them make themselves more secure. And with that, realize, hey, we're building a lot of custom stuff between us. Why don't we go out and do something? And that's kind of why we had decided to start Kusari.
Gotcha. Now, I always like asking the origin of names. Where did Kusari come from?
So Kusari is the Japanese word for chain. So like supply chain is also used a lot in like other, computer science terms like linked list. In Japanese, they use Kusari for a lot of that sort of stuff. And again, it's like, it's a combination of how do we do the SEO bit and how do we sort of like differentiate ourselves and how do we also make it still relatively easy to to spell and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the origin of that.
I like it. My company is called Sonotify Technology, and I'm always asked, like, where did the hell did that come from? And I had actually acquired an existing company that was called Sonata Services, and I'm like, I have to jazz this up.
Yeah.
I'm like, Shy, Spotify, Sonotify.
Hey, whatever works.
That's right. That's right. All right. So tell us what you do at Kusari.
Sure. So I'm the CTO, which again, as a co-founder, it just means we all do the same sort of stuff. We kind of trade off stuff. So this is everything from sort of boilerplate, not boilerplate, but like from sort of the chopping wood, like keeping the lights on sorts of things, of making sure everybody gets paid, making sure that, all of our HR stuff gets taken care of, make sure that paychecks go out, that sort of stuff. On the day-to-day, from a technical perspective, a lot of my work is twofold. One is I do a lot of work in open source. So I'm also heavily involved in the Linux Foundation. So I'm a member of the OpenSSF, or the Open Source Security Foundation, where I'm a governing board member as well as a member of the Technical Advisory Council, and they're a group underneath the Linux Foundation umbrella. So for folks who aren't familiar, like the Linux Foundation has a whole bunch of projects underneath them, like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF, which owns stuff like the Kubernetes intellectual property. And then they also have stuff like OpenSSF, or the Open Source Security Foundation, which has various projects, some of which we contribute to, including things like Salsa and Guac, which are two open source projects we heavily contribute to. So I'm heavily involved in open source, trying to build open source community, build an understanding of the supply chain security issues that are out there that everybody has to deal with. And then in addition to that, I provide a lot of sort of oversight to the internal projects that we're building inside of Kusari, providing, setting goals, providing OKRs and all that good stuff. And sometimes when I do get the chance, getting my hands dirty with code, but that becomes less and less, nowadays, now that, as Kusari continues to grow.
Gotcha. Now tell us about some current projects you're working on.
Sure. So there's two main projects inside of Kusari that we work on. One, the primary one that we had built out over the past few years is called we just call it the Kusari platform. But what it is it's a SaaS product that we provide to our customers that essentially what it does is we take in our customers' software supply chain security metadata. So these are things like software bill of materials, for folks who are familiar with that. For folks who are not familiar with that, pretty much what it is your dependency files that might be inside of your organization. So these are things like your requirements.txt if you're Python, or your package.json if you're a JavaScript shop, those sorts of things. We're able to sort of pull all of this metadata in about all of the software your software uses, and to provide you sort of a prioritization and other sorts of metrics and analytics on the software that your organizations are building or are using, to help you understand, hey, if there is a vulnerability. So for example, the Log4j vulnerability from a few years ago that hit so many folks, if another one of those hits, is that in one place, right? Just against one of your projects, or is it in 50 places, in 50 of your projects? And if it does hit 50 of your projects, is it all the same version? Is it 50 different versions? And not just that, but is it a direct dependency that each one of those projects directly uses Log4j, or is it because they're all using another library like Spring, and Spring uses Log4j? And helping folks sort of organize that to understand how do they fix the problems that they're seeing today, because a lot of folks are having a ton of issues with sort of figuring out what's going on. They say, hey, I know I have 100,000 vulnerabilities, but I don't know where to get started. We help sort of tell you where to get started. Is this an issue that impacts your external facing applications that is going to put you out of business? Or is this just in a sandbox, right? Because if it's in a sandbox, hey, it's something I should still address, but it's not the most immediate concern. If it's in your, if you're an online bank, and, if you have an online banking application, maybe that's the first thing to address. So that's one of our projects. And then the second one is something that we just released a few weeks ago called Inspector, or Kusari Inspector, which is a GitHub app where what it does is you could use it with, when you open up a pull request, let's say in GitHub for your code, it essentially acts as like a security co-pilot where
Okay.
it does things like it scans for secrets. It scans for, security bad practices. Like, do you have a SQL injection vulnerability? Are you including, bad security practices? Are you using an insecure hashing algorithm? Those sorts of things. It's able to sort of run various scans and then also do that recursively against your sort of dependencies. So it does a background check on your dependencies to say, hey, are you pulling in something that has been deprecated 3 years ago, or are you using something that's well maintained? Are you pulling in something that is a known, well supported library, something like a Spring, something like Kubernetes, or are you pulling in something that's what's often called typo squatted? Like, are you pulling in malicious software that that has a similar name to Kubernetes, right? Are you pulling in those things? It does all of that sort of stuff, all runs various scans against that, filters out all sort of the noise. So again, if you have, for example, a secret, is it actually a secret, or is it just no, it's a secret in some test code, so it's obviously a test secret. So don't over index on that. Don't tell me, hey, you have a problem here, because most people are there's just so much noise. So we take all that, we filter all that, we sort of feed it into an LLM to then provide sort of synthesized feedback to the developers, who can then go in and actually do something about it. So, for example, hey, you have a vulnerable package. Did you know that they fixed that in a newer version? Here's what that newer version is, just update. Or, hey, did you know that you're running this, this is a potential SQL injection vulnerability. All you got to do is change this line to this line and you're good. So we provide that sort of stuff to our customers as well.
What is your go-to-market strategy to let the world know of these great tools you have?
Sure. So for the platform, it is very much an enterprise strategy. So we are reaching out to various different market segments that are going to be getting hit the hardest here. So these are the folks like who are in regulated spaces. So medical device manufacturers, for example. There's also the Cyber Resiliency Act that's coming out of the EU. It's not in full effect yet, but over the next few years will go into full effect. And that sort of thing anybody who sells software in the EU must do certain security things. And we're already ready for that. So we can help our customers sort of do that. And so we're reaching out to folks who are going to be impacted by that as well. And then what I'll say is the inspector's a little bit of, if that's more of the top down, inspector's more of the bottom up. So sort of more of that sneak sort of model of capturing the developers who are like, I don't want to be an expert in security. I care about security, but I don't want to be an expert in security. Great. Right. Use something like Inspector, because it's just the thing. It stays out of your way. If you're doing all the right stuff, it stays out of your way. And if you're not doing the right thing, it doesn't overwhelm you. It just says, hey, you're using a bad dependency here. Just swap this for this other one and you should be good. And it helps sort of out with that. And that's more of a grassroots sort of thing, where initially a lot of word of mouth, a lot of demos, probably in the future, or you'll imagine a lot of YouTube videos showing it off, trying to kind of work with folks like who might be some, influencers in sort of this sort of space, and showing folks that, hey, this can get done in a way where you could be secure cheaply, and you don't need to be an expert, right? Our big thing is like, developers are being asked to do way too much, and they're being asked to be locksmiths, right? They're being asked to be a locksmith in addition to a carpenter, right? To build the house. It's like, whereas they want to just be the carpenter and hire a locksmith to come install the lock. They don't want to design the lock themselves. They want to say, hey, this is the sort of lock I need, and just use it.
Definitely a lot of pressure on developers today that with AI tools, you should be able to do everything. There's a lot that can go wrong, especially on the security side.
Yes. And that's the thing we're seeing. There's a new term that's been coined called slop squatting, where you have this thing where AI sometimes generates slop because it's trying to take, it's more than just, better autocomplete. But a lot of the challenge with it is, if AI doesn't have a lot of good context to go off of, it sometimes hallucinates a thing. You might say, hey, I want a logging library that does this, this, and this, and it'll find one for Java and sort of imagine the one for Go, and it says, hey, here's this thing.
But did you call this slop squatting?
Yeah, so it's a new term coined by somebody named Seth Larson. He's from the Python Foundation. And he, in some discussions with a bunch of folks we're all in the community with, he was like, hey, one of the things that they're starting to see is AI will hallucinate libraries and say, hey, there's a library called, log4j-python or something like that. And there isn't a library that actually exists. But what a malicious actor will do is say, well, now there's one, I'm going to create
Yes.
it. And then they create it, and then that library, you're just thinking, hey, I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT responds with use, log4j-python, and I used it, and now it leaked all my, security credentials. It hacked my computer. Like, these are the sorts of things that folks are worried about in AI as well now that we're trying to deal with.
I like that. And I was not familiar with that term, slop squatting. That's a good one. All right. Tell us about your engineering team. How's your team structured? Where are you located? What's the working model?
Sure. So right now we're pretty flat. So Kusari itself is 12 people right now total, of which about 9 of us are directly involved in engineering in some capacity, maybe more on the day-to-day. I would say 6 folks are more just engineers, sort of the day-to-day there. We're very flat right now. Again, there's only a few of us. For us, we have a couple of folks who are focused on infrastructure, and then we have a couple of folks who are more focused on both. We have couple of folks focused on front end, and then everybody else is sort of more focused on the back end software that we've been building. But there is a lot of overlap in each of those spaces because we kind of need that where we want to avoid being siloed, and we want to kind of make sure that everybody is cross-pollinating experience, so that again, if somebody is out, can you pick up the slack for that person again, that given how flat we are today.
And are you guys remote?
Yeah, we're all 100% remote. Given that we started the company in 2022, it was kind of on the tail end of the worst of the pandemic. It just didn't make sense. And a lot of our folks are distributed. So we have, one person in Canada, a couple of folks in the Midwest, a couple of folks on the West Coast, and then a few of us out here on the East Coast as well.
Gotcha. So talk about your ideal tech stack and why.
Sure. I mean, for me, I think it all really depends on the specific things we're going after. So, but I will say inside of Kusari, a lot of it right now is, and I think this works well for us, is sort of Go as a backend. Personally, I'm a fan of Rust, but I think a lot of the rest of the team is very heavily focused on Go. And I think the thing that we really like about Go is how easy it is to get going with it, and you could have something real quick with it. And then, so that's kind of on the back end. And then on the front end, one of the things that we really like is we really like Vue. I've used React in the past, but I'm actually been really impressed by the Vue stuff there. And so we use a lot of Vue and TypeScript for a lot of things on our front end work. And then in addition to that, all of our infrastructure, I would say we're very happy with stuff like AWS's services. There's always going to be the concern with we try to play the balance between the ease of just using a particular set of AWS services and then coupling ourselves directly to AWS. Because again, some of our customers want, for example, air-gapped deployments that maybe are in Azure and those sorts of things. So we're always playing that balance because AWS provides us a lot of flexibility, a lot of cost savings, and a lot of just sort of automated support sorts of things. Like normally we might have to support running this in generic Kubernetes, or we could run this as a Lambda and AWS takes care of the rest. So we're always playing through that balance a little bit depending on what individual subcomponent of the things we've been building.
Gotcha. All right. So what's your biggest challenge you're facing right now?
So I think some of the biggest challenges we're facing today are around how to sort of build out what we're building in a way where identifying the customer needs with also the technical challenges, right? Like we don't want to I think the biggest issue is we don't want to over optimize anything yet, because we don't want to spend weeks scaling up a particular thing and then find out that feature is not really used a lot by our customers until we need to. So it's always going to be this interesting balance there. And that I think is a big challenge. And I think another big challenge is how do we keep our overall architecture relatively simple and straightforward. So as we grow it in size, newer components can come in and easily get added on. Newer potential products we might build out can easily get added on without necessarily needing to spend a ton of time and effort in building complicated abstractions and those sorts of things. So I think a lot of that challenge is around the balancing act of all those things.
Gotcha. And is this the first venture that you've been a co-founder of?
Yeah, this is the first venture. I had worked at another startup earlier in my career, but I was just like a senior sort of engineer at that point in
Okay.
time. But this is my, this is actually for all three of us co-founders, this is our first rodeo, as we've been telling folks. It's been an interesting ride. I'll tell you that.
Nice. And you guys raised a seed round. What advice do you have for people doing that? That's always a pain.
Yeah, I think the thing is, there's two parts of it. One is, make sure you have a good story to tell. It's really about that good story of having the good story is probably the most important thing. And the thing you'll probably be surprised by is what do you need to have from a code perspective or a software perspective to actually get that funding is actually a lot less than you might think. And in fact, if you have something that's super well refined, it could actually hurt you if it's not the thing that the market needs. So in a lot of ways, having something that's a bit more raw and can be shaped in different directions depending on the market is much, much better than having something that's super well refined, but it's clear that it's not the right fit for what folks currently need today. So that was something I think that was a bit of a surprise for us. And again, the three of us founders all have very highly technical backgrounds, and we didn't have a lot of that sales marketing background and so a lot of that was a bit of a learning journey for us the first year or so of Kusari.
Well, fantastic, Mike. That's great advice. Appreciate you getting uncensored with us today. Excited to see how you continue to shape the industry, the supply chain challenges you guys are going after, and tech leadership at large. Any final advice for tech leaders you have, Mike?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just keep ahead of things. Obviously, the big thing for tech leaders is be a force multiplier. For as much as you might want to focus on certain individual implementation sort of things, whether it is the marketing side, the sales side, the technical side. Yes, get your hands dirty when you need to, but I think the biggest thing is how do you build the processes and cultures inside of your organizations to enable your sort of ACs, the boots on the ground to actually be able to do what needs to be done to get the work done. And, sometimes that is, making sure that the paychecks go out over, hopping on the sales call. Make sure that the folks who are experts at that can get the stuff done.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. Stay bold and keep building, everyone.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.